So the Russophobia has resulted with not allowing for room for a lot of diplomacy. There doesn't seem to be any discussion about it. There's mostly discussion about more and more weapons and less oversight. And I think, that's why we're having this discussion tonight, Dmitry. Could you talk a little bit about your job right now going forward and the mood right now in Moscow, or, something that you would like American citizens to know, because American citizens are not, of course, the political elite running this. Most American citizens don't want this conflict, right? And most American citizens don't have feelings of animosity towards Russia even. And there's been polls to indicate that. In fact, Vladimir Putin, your president, of the Russian Federation, had actually very high polling in the US when they did polling. So to some extent, some of the propaganda has not worked. So what is the mood right now as we move forward and deeper into winter and towards spring? Is there any movement towards peace, more allowing you to do more diplomacy?
I think, Tara, that most of the US citizens which would happen to be in Moscow, they will be very much surprised of how different the country and the life in the capital will be different from what mass media and state propaganda will tell you. And it's really always a start of conversation with any American fellow man, I would say, fellow citizens, for asking me questions. And when I answer them and when I give them facts, they're very much astonished about the economic situation in Russia, about the level of support that our authorities have in Russia and the level of patriotism that we have. So this kind of military operation that we are now conducting is not something that we want to choose this. And we had different scenario, of course, for all this. But it was there was no other solution, unfortunately, to get rid of this hornet's nest that was on our borders, which sooner or later would really become a much bigger problem for Russia. And this hornet's nest, of course, didn't turned up by itself. It was planted there by the United States and its allies. It was growing and growing and growing, and now we know. Thanks to Mrs. Merkel, who was one of the guarantors of the Minsk agreements, we now know for sure that the West was just winning time, trying to arm Ukraine and preparing for this kind of situation, but with much better starting positions for Ukraine. So now I think the public opinion in Russia after Mrs. Merkel's words is even more convinced in the fact that it was the right decision to start this military operation. We would like to have the goals of this military operation achieved through peaceful means. And it was possible. We were proposing to Western countries on the eve of this operation to get around the table and to discuss security guarantees for Russia and to discuss things about Ukraine, how Ukraine needs to implement Minsk agreements. And it was very easy, by the way, several very easy conditions. First of all, to stop shelling its citizens, to acknowledge the fact that they have human rights, they have the right to speak their own language, to worship their heroes and not the people who were collaborating with Hitler. And that's it. Basically, these two basic rules, something that is absolutely normal for anybody else, something that is normal for Europe, for the United States, but that something is not required from Ukraine by Western countries. So if we could achieve it through other means, if we could achieve it through negotiating table, through some kind of guarantees, we would with pleasure do it. But unfortunately, what we got from the West at this moment was very condescending treatment and kind of dismissal of any our preoccupations. And then, as you know, the shelling of Donbass intensified, very significantly intensified. And that's it all started. So how can we end it? Again, our president stated repeatedly that we would be pleased to end it peacefully. We would be pleased to end it at negotiating table. But of course, it is possible only through looking into the deep roots, grassroots of this problem and eradicating them. For Ukraine not representing in the future any danger to Russia, for Ukraine treating Russian-speaking population in the way it should be treated. Now what we see is quite the opposite. To all the problems that I mentioned, you can also add the religious persecution that you have now in Ukraine, fighting with the church, with the churches, the Orthodox Church there, which is also very deplorable. So the country is absolutely going in the wrong direction, and nobody in the West is really noticing it. So I'm afraid that the only thing that we have to continue our military operation, and we have to fight not only with Ukraine, as I told you, but with NATO weapons, with more and more involvement from NATO intelligence data and mercenaries. We have to fight all these factors, but we have no other way. We have no other choice, I'm afraid, to use all the military tools that are in our possession, and that's what we have right now.
Well, and you brought up some good points. I mean, and to the audience that is newer, and wasn't with us when Dmitry was in last time, he was talking also about the beginning of this conflict being in 2014, which is when the coup happened, and Julian Assange, who's now been imprisoned for publishing emails and phone calls and proof that there were war crimes being committed in a coup in 2014 by the US government and British intelligence. And you know, there's proof of that. It's been undisputed. And then since 2014, there was the Minsk II agreements that were not upheld. And that's what you're referring to, with no intention from the West to uphold them, apparently, is what's come out by the former German chancellor. And 14,000 Russian nationals lost their lives over the period of last 8 years, plus now more since the bombing of Donbass. And it's heartbreaking, really, that the whole fact about Nazis, the Azov battalions and other battalions are quite active and have been armed by the US and by NATO countries to do more harm and to commit war crimes possibly. And also, well, in fact, they have. So, and there's also been false flags where Russia's been blamed for Bucha, and there's proof that it was a it was a false flag by one of those battalions actually that carried out some of those missions. So there's lots of information about this war that you can find out the history, and you can find out what's been going on. If you look at like Ukraine on Fire, which is by Igor Lopotonik, who is Ukrainian and Russian director who works with Oliver Stone. So I suggest that you do that. Look at Max Blumenthal's most recent Gray Zone, and you can get, some historical context.